The Big Deal, 1953. Directed by Vincent J. Donahue. Associate producer Gordon Duff. Produced by Fred Coe. Act 1. Fade in. Interior restaurant. Not too posh, but the tables have linen tablecloths. Camera wends its way between two tables at which various chatting people are eating their luncheon. A waiter and a couple crowd their way past camera. General effect of crowded cafe. We narrow our attention to a little man of 50-odd years seated at a table, studying a cup of coffee in front of him. He has on a blue pencil-striped suit, single-breasted, and which somehow gives the feeling of the 1930s. His tie is tied into a narrow, elegant knot, but it is slightly askew. His shirt collar turns up at the edges. His fedora rests on the table at his elbow. This is Joe Manx. He looks up, and his face perks up a bit as he recognizes someone approaching his table. A moment later, a pretty girl of 26 comes to his table, bends over him, gives him a quick kiss. The daughter. Hello, Pa. Joe. Sit down, Marilyn, sit down. You want something to eat? Eggs, a sandwich, anything like that? The daughter, sitting. No, Pa, I'm meeting George for lunch in about 15 minutes. Joe. Sure. Give him my regards when you see him. I won't hold you. I happen to need about $10-15 if you happen to have it on you. The daughter, promptly opening her purse. Sure, Pa. Joe. I ran across a very interesting proposition today, and I'd like to take the man out for a couple of drinks. I have an appointment with him at 4 o'clock. The daughter, extracting some bills from her purse. Are you sure $15 will be enough? Joe. Oh, plenty. I'm just going to take him for a couple of drinks. Takes the bills. I might be able to pay you this back on Thursday, because I'm playing a little pinochle over at Harry Gerber's tomorrow night. And I usually come out a couple of bucks ahead. Listen, Marilyn, don't let me hold you. I know you're anxious to get to see George. The daughter. All right, Pa, I'll see you later. Joe. Just let me say that this is a very interesting proposition that I ran across today. I don't want to sound premature, but I have a feeling that this might be the deal I've been looking for. I won't bore you with the details. I only want to say that this proposition involves Louis Miles, if the name is at all familiar to you. He happens to be one of the biggest contractors in the business. 18 years ago, he was a lousy little plasterer. I gave him his first work. Well, I was down the municipal building today. It happened that Well, look, I don't want to hold you. I can see you're anxious to see your boyfriend. Go ahead. Give him my regards. Don't tell your mother you gave me some money. The daughter, who has been smiling fondly at her daughter throughout his speech. Okay, Pa, I'll see you. Joe, I'll see you. Have a good lunch. The daughter exits off. Joe sits a moment, fingering the 2 bills his daughter has just given him. Then he suddenly lifts a hand imperiously and calls sharply out. Joe. Waiter, check. The Zal 2, a section of one of those little restaurants you always find around hospitals. We see 2 booths. Camera dollies past first booth, which contains 2 young doctors, one middle-aged doctor and a young nurse, all in traditional white hospital uniforms. We move in on second booth, which contains the daughter and a young resident doctor named George. He is wearing the conventional white jacketed uniform with innumerable pencils and pens clipped into his outer breast pocket. They have their pie and coffee in front of them. Also, of the meal they have just eaten, which have not been taken away yet. The daughter is eating her pie, but George is just fiddling with his fork. They are both obviously caught in deep discussion. The daughter. I know these aren't ideal circumstances to get married in, but who gets married in ideal circumstances? Do you know what I mean? George. I know. The daughter. I mean, everybody has problems when they get married. They got parents to support and finding a place to live, and they don't have enough money. These are just things everybody has to face when they get married. Look at Alex and Ann Macy. Neither of them had a job when they got married. We're lucky compared to them, for heaven's sakes. George. Well, what do you want to do? You want to get married then? The daughter. Yeah. George. Well, let's get married then. Let's get it over with. The daughter. Let's get it over with. You make it sound like I was going to electrocute you. George. Look, Marilyn, marriage is a responsible business. I've got 2 more years of residency. You're going to have to support me for 2 years. That's the trouble with being a doctor. The first half of his life, he has to be supported by somebody. It's a terrible thing to feel that somebody is sacrificing for you all the time. My mother and my father, they went through torture to make me a doctor. Every time my old man sends me a check, I get a little sick in my stomach. And they don't understand. You know what I mean? They don't understand why I just don't rent myself an office on Halsey Street and open up a practice. I finished my year of interning. I'm an MD. They don't understand why I'm taking all these years of residency at a salary of $22 a month. Well, I want to be an internist. That's why. I like internal medicine. I don't want to be a GP. There's 1,000 GPs on Halsey Street now. Every ground floor window you walk by, there's another GP. The daughter. George. Well, the point is, Marilyn, I've got 2 more years of residency ahead of me, and you're going to have to support me for 2 years. The daughter. I'm making a good salary, George. You're already supporting your mother and father. The daughter. I've got the $5,000 my Aunt Ava left me. George. Look, Marilyn, you want to get married, it's all right with me. Let's get married. The daughter frowns down at her plate. I mean it. I'm not on call tomorrow. We'll go to City Hall and get married. What do we need? Blood tests? All right, I'll take you up to the blood lab right now. Finish your coffee, we'll go up to the blood lab and we'll get our specimens taken. What do we have to wait, 3 days? What's today, Tuesday? All right, we'll get married on Friday. They both look down at their plates, a moment of uncomfortable silence. My mother is dead set against this marriage, you know that, don't you? Even my old man, who likes you a lot, says I can't afford to take on a wife at this moment. The daughter. Take on a wife? What am I, some kind of bundle you're going to carry on your back? George. I didn't mean it that way. The daughter. You're a boy. You know that? You're a 17-year-old boy. What do you think marriage is? Death in a gas chamber? Marriage is making somebody happy. You get better from marriage, not worse. Maybe you might find the next 2 years a little easier if you had somebody near you who wants you to be happy with all her heart and soul. The daughter's eyes are wet with tears now. I want you to be an internist. I want you to finish your residency. I don't care if I have to support half of Toledo, Ohio. It's no sacrifice to me if it makes you happy. And I expect the same from you. She hides her eyes in her hand and tries to master herself. George sits in the sudden vacuum left by the daughter's outburst, looking down at his hands folded in his lap. Then he looks up and across at his girlfriend and smiles gently. George rises, crosses around the table, sits beside her. Marilyn, honestly, I don't know why I'm making such a crisis out of this. I'm a little scared, that's all. You just forget how much you love the girl. I would like to officially set our wedding for this coming Friday if you'll have me. And I promise to make you happy. So what do you say? The daughter. I finally collared you, eh? George beaming. Yeah. Dissolve to the front hallway of a 4.5-room apartment. We are looking at the front door, which now opens and admits Joe Manx. He closes the door behind him, takes off his hat, puts it on the mail table. Then, carrying himself with a sort of bantam erectness, he passes into the living room. The camera ambles along after him. The living room is furnished with what had been good, solid, expensive, middle-class furniture 2 decades ago. The dominating piece in the living room is a large, dark mahogany table with thick, intricately carved legs. At the head of the table is a massive chair with thick armrests. Obviously the chair of the master of the house. It is to this chair that Joe marches. He takes off his jacket, drapes it around the back of the chair, rolls up his shirt sleeves 2 turns, loosens his tie, unbuttons his collar, and then sits down in the chair, placing his arms on the armrests. For a moment he just sits there, enjoying a small feeling of majesty. And he lifts his head and calls out, "Joe, I'm home." The wife appears in the kitchen doorway. She is a strong woman of about 50. She is dressed in a house dress and is carrying a dish towel. On her face there is the anticipatory smile of someone who is about to impart a secret. Her secret becomes immediately apparent when the daughter appears behind her in the kitchen doorway. The wife, surveying her husband with that smile. "Joe, I got something in the nature of a pleasant shock to tell you, so get a good hold on your chair. I don't want you to fall off and hit your head on the floor." She comes into the living room, takes a chair at the far end of the table. "Joe, I ran across a very interesting proposition today." The daughter, also sidling into the room wearing a smile. "Hello, Pa." "Joe, I was down the municipal building. I was with Martin Kingsley. Martin was having a little permit trouble, so he says to me, 'Joe, come on down with me to the housing department.' After all, Commissioner Gerber is a very good friend of mine. He figured I might put in a couple of good words for him." The wife. "Did you talk to Harry Gerber about that other matter?" Joe. "Doris, I'm telling a story. Don't interrupt." "Well, all right. I went down to the municipal building. I'm standing in the hallway by the water fountain. I went over to get a drink, so..." The wife. "Joe, a man comes over to me, a big, fat, bald-headed man. He looks at me, he says, 'Aren't you Joe Meggs?' So I look at him, I say, 'You'll have to excuse me. Your face is familiar, but I can't quite place you.' So he looks at me, he says, 'I'm Louis Miles. Doris, you remember Louis Miles, 17, 18 years ago? He was a plasterer.'" The wife. Joe, "It seems he's a big construction man now in Cleveland." "Well, that's neither here nor there. So anyway, we got to talking about this and that, and it seems that he's bought himself a piece of land, about 15 acres out near Williston, with the intention of putting up 60 or 80 houses, small ranch houses, 15,000, maybe 1650 tops. Well, he starts to dig a little, and boom, he runs into water. I said to him, 'Louis, for heaven's sakes, if you would have asked me, I would have told you. The whole Williston area is nothing but marshland.' Well, the upshot of it is he wants to sell the land. We made a date for 4 o'clock at the Statler Hotel." Rises, crosses to his daughter. "Sweetheart, I wonder if you'd do me a very big favor." The daughter. "Sure, Pa." Joe. "I wonder if you could get me a small glass of cold water. I'm very thirsty." The daughter. "Sure." She promptly exits into the kitchen. Joe. "Well, I began to do a little quick thinking. If I had 150 acres of land, that's 6 million square feet with a 50-foot frontage, I could put up 1,000 houses. With 1,000 houses, it's worth the trouble and expense of draining. Now, my dear lady, we are talking in terms of $1 million proposition. 1,000 small houses, nothing big, low-income houses like that Levitt town in New York. Have you any idea how much money that man Levitt made? Countless millions. Countless." The daughter returns with a glass of water, which she sets at her father's place. "Thank you, sweetheart. Thank you." The wife. "Joe, Marilyn also ran across a very interesting proposition today. Joe. The upshot of it all was at 4 o'clock I went to Statler. I said, Louis, what do you think of this idea? Louis, I said, why don't we buy up another 150, 160 more acres, and instead of setting up a lousy 60 houses, we'll set up 1,000. Well, I'll tell you something. If you ever saw a man get shocked, you should have seen Louis Miles's face when I said that. He looked at me like I was crazy. The wife. He was right, too. Joe. It's very funny. When I built those houses on Chestnut Street and Halsey Street and King Boulevard, everybody also looked at me like I was crazy. The wife. That was in 1934. Joe. That whole Chestnut Street district was nothing but swamps, snakes and frogs. The grass was so high you can get lost in it. The wife. All right, Joe, what was the upshot of it all with Louis Miles? Joe. The upshot of it all was that he couldn't see it. He wants to sell that 15 acres. He wants to get out of the whole deal. So I said to him, Louis, what do you want for that 15 acres? So he says, $4,000. So I said, Louis, I may take that land right off your hand. And that's the way it stands at the moment. The wife. As long as you were down the housing department today, did you go in and see Harry Gerber? Joe suddenly scowls. Joe. Doris, I want to get one thing straight right now. I don't want to hear anything more about Harry Gerber. I don't need your advice and counsel. It seems to be your pleasure to make fun of me. The wife. I don't make fun of you, Joe. Joe. As far as you're concerned, I'm a big talker without a nickel to his name who thinks he's a big shot. All right, I'm broke. I'm strapped. But I was once the biggest builder in this city, and I'm still a respected name in the trade. Go to Frank Doherty and Sons. Mention the name of Joe Manx, see what he says. Deputy Housing Commissioner Harry Gerber still calls me up once or twice a week for a little advice. State Senator Howard Schramm came halfway across the restaurant to ask my opinion about a bill he's pushing up in Columbus. So when I tell you this is $1 million proposition, don't be so clever. Don't be so smart. When I die, there will be $1 million in my will. Don't worry. Returns to his master chair, sits down, disgruntled and scowling. An uncomfortable silence falls over the family. At last, daughter leans to her father, the daughter, smiling. Pa, I'm getting married Friday. Joe turns his head slowly and regards the daughter with open-mouthed shock. Joe. When did this happen? The daughter. Just at lunch, just after I saw you. The daughter. The wife. I told you we had a shock for you. Joe. Well, for heaven's sakes. Which one is this, the doctor? George? The daughter nods her head happily. Well, where is he, for heaven's sakes? This calls for some kind of celebration. Seems to me we should have some wine, a little festivity. For heaven's sakes, a man comes walking home and his daughter casually remarks she's getting married. Listen, call him up on the phone, tell him to come over tonight. The daughter, smiling. He's on duty tonight, Pa. Joe. I'm taking the whole bunch of us out for a real celebration. The daughter. He's coming over tomorrow night, Pa. Joe is staring at his wife, who is beaming. Joe. What are you sitting there in a house dress for? Your daughter's getting married. Go put some lipstick on, for heaven's sakes. The wife. I just found out myself 15 minutes ago. The daughter. Pa. Joe. What's the fanciest restaurant in town? The wife. I got a chicken in the stove now. Joe. We'll eat it cold tomorrow. He is herding his wife out of her chair. Come on, into the bedroom. Put on a dress with feathers on it. Joe Manx's daughter gets married. This town is going to hear about it. The daughter, laughing to the wife who is being crowded to the door. All right, Ma. I feel like celebrating myself. The daughter, over her husband's shoulder to her daughter. Marilyn, do me a favor. Go in the kitchen, turn off all the fires. The daughter. Sure, Ma. The wife exits. The daughter goes into the kitchen. Joe stands by the kitchen doorway. Joe. More or less to Marilyn in the kitchen. Well, this is certainly an occasion. A nice young fellow. He's going to make a success out of himself. In a couple of years, mark my words, he'll be making 20, 30,000 bucks a year. Crosses to the kitchen doorway and stands on the threshold watching his daughter. Under a little different circumstances, I would have given you 2 kids a wedding. The whole city of Toledo would talk about it for weeks. I'd have $1,000 worth of cold cuts alone. You'd have some big shots at your wedding, believe me. State Senator Howard Tram would be there, I can tell you that. They'd pour the whiskey out of barrels. The ballroom would be littered with drunks. Very important drunks. Men worth in the millions. The daughter joins him at the kitchen doorway and stands listening to him with a smile of deep fondness and understanding. For a moment, Joe returns her gaze, obviously very fond of his daughter. Then his eyes drop. Joe, his voice lowered. Marilyn, I'll need a couple of bucks to cover this evening. It might come as much as $25. The daughter smiling. Sure, Pa. She reaches out with her hand and lightly touches his face. Then she turns and moves to the dining room table where her purse lies. Camera stays on Joe for close-up. His eyes are closed. He has to control himself or else he would cry. Dissolved to, Joe and Doris Manx's bedroom late that night. Actually, we open up on the wife, dressed now in an old batiste nightgown. She is standing by the window applying lotion to her hands and looking down, watching the operation. Then she turns and looks over to her husband and then back again to her hands. The camera pans slowly to Joe, who was unbuttoning his shirt, also wrapped up in his thoughts. The push and aggressiveness have gone from Joe. He seems tired and a little slumped. The wife now shuffles down the aisle between the twin beds and perches on hers. She rubs the lotion into her hands, but it is clear that she is fishing for the best way to open the conversation. The wife, still looking down as she creams her hands. Joe, she's going to have to support her husband for a couple of years. She isn't going to be able to pay the rent on this house no more. Maybe we're going to have to move. I don't know. But we're not taking another penny from that girl. Even with Eva's $5,000, it's going to be hard enough on her as it is. Joe sits on the far end of his bed, his back to his wife a little slumped. Harry Gerber says he has a job for you with the city. Why don't you at least go down and talk to him about it? Joe, mumbling. I'll see Harry tomorrow. We're playing pinochle tomorrow night at his house. The wife, who didn't quite hear him. I'm sorry, Joe, I didn't hear what you said. Joe, a little louder. I said I'll see Harry tomorrow night. We're playing pinochle at his house tomorrow night. The wife. All right, you'll see him tomorrow night. Having finished rubbing her hands, she brings her feet onto the bed and picks up a newspaper from the bed table between the beds and starts to read. Joe, muttering. If you want to know, I went to see Harry Gerber last week. The wife reading. What did you say, Joe? Joe rises. Joe. I said I went to see Harry Gerber last week if you want to know the truth. The wife looks up from her paper. The wife. When was this? Joe. Last week sometime. I don't know. Tuesday? Wednesday? What do you think? I don't want a decent job? You think I like being supported by my daughter? You don't think it hurts? The wife. So what happened with Harry Gerber? Joe. It was some job he had for me. A building inspector. $3,600 a year. $3,600. Newspaper money. I put Harry Gerber into business. He was a $75 a week accountant. I took him in and made him a partner. He offers me a $3,600 a year job. Now he's a big shot. Deputy Housing Commissioner. I told him what he could do with his job. The wife, unable to think of anything appropriate to say, looks back at her newspaper. Joe, crying out, I'm not a $3,600 a year man. The wife. All right. Don't yell so loud. She'll hear you. She puts the newspaper down, sits up. Joe moves around to the inside of his bed, sits down on his bed, faces his wife. Joe. Doris, I was a big operator at one time. The wife. That was 15 years ago, Joe. Joe. All right. The bottom fell out of the real estate market. I went broke. All right. I still got it up here. Indicates his head. I can't think in terms of $3,600 a year. I'm not a candy store owner keeping an eye on the kids so they won't steal the pennies off the newsstand. I'm a businessman. The wife. Joe, how many businesses have you tried? You tried the trucking business. You tried the... Joe, I was out of my element. I'm a builder. That's my racket. The wife. I won't let you take any more money off that girl. Joe, what do you want me to do? You want me to take this job as a lousy building inspector? The wife. Joe, don't talk so loud. Joe, you want me to walk around with my hand out waiting for a $5 payoff. I won't do it. Some of the biggest men in the business are my friends. The wife. All right, Joe, sit down. Don't be so excited. Joe, who has risen from his bed, now sinks back, his breath coming heavily. Joe, looking down at his knees. Don't worry about me, Doris. We're not going to take another penny off that girl. If you don't think it sticks me in my heart to ask her for $10 here, $15 there so I can play a little pinochle, don't you think I have a little contempt for myself? I don't have to be reminded I love that girl. What have I ever given her? I couldn't afford to send her to a decent college. I haven't even got a life insurance policy so that she could at least benefit from my death. The wife. Oh, for heaven's sakes, Joe, don't be so dramatic. We had money once. We don't have it anymore. You've had a long time to get used to that fact. Joe, pounding the bed table. I'm going to leave that girl $1 million in my will. The wife. Joe, what are you yelling about? Go wash yourself and let's go to bed. You're in one of your moods and I don't want to argue with you. Joe. Listen, Joe Manx may be broke. He may be strapped, but he's still got it up here. The wife. $3,600 a year would suit us fine. What do we need more? We're getting on in years. Joe. There's $1 million proposition in that Williston land. A little manipulation, a little maneuvering, and a man who hasn't got a nickel rides around in a Cadillac. Right now, all I need is $4,000. I want to pick up Louis Miles's land. You got to have a piece of land to start with. You can't build without land. Joe has forgotten his wife as he gets involved in his manipulations. He begins to pace slow, measured strides up and down beside his bed, his hands behind his back. Joe. All right, $4,000. That's not so hard. I'll walk into Frank Doherty's office. I'll say, I want $4,000, and that's all there is to that. The wife, long familiar with these mutterings of her husband, turns her bed lamp off, turns over on her side, and tries to go to sleep. The only light in the room now is the bed lamp over Joe's bed. Joe. But now comes the manipulation. 150 acres draining and construction costs the way they are today, it's going to run at least $250,000. He lies back on the bed now, his hands folded over his paunch, his eyes wide and glowing. Joe, I'll have to have the land and at least $50,000 before I can go to the banks. I'll call Sam Harvard first thing in the morning. This is something that can interest him. The camera begins to move up slowly onto his face. He's there dreaming aloud. Joe, I could possibly realize $200,000 out of this. A very interesting proposition. A very interesting proposition. The camera moves right into his eyes. Fade out. Act 2. Fade in. Construction work going on in a city. A high wooden fence has been erected around the large corner of the construction. Towering above the fence are the skeletal girders of the proposed building. Noise and sounds of construction. The camera pans slowly across this view, up and onto a huge wooden sign on which is written, "A new 12-story office building will be erected on this site. To be completed September 1953. Frank Doherty and Sons, General Contractors." Close in on name of Doherty. Cut to interior construction shack crudely furnished. A wooden table piled with papers and blueprints, a portable typewriter, a telephone. Coveralls hang from wall nails. On the wall, an artist's conception of the proposed office building with Doherty's name in bold printed letters at the bottom. Two men are in the shop, both in their 40s. Both are rough-hewn types. Both wear baggy suits and hats, despite the fact that it is a July day. They are leaning over a large blueprint spread out on the table, muttering indistinctly to each other. Suddenly, one bursts out. The first man. "So what are we going to do with all those guys sitting out there?" The second man. "Nothing. The reinforcement rods aren't here yet." The two men return to the blueprint. There is a knock at the door. The second man, without looking up, barks out, "Come in." The door opens and Joe Manx comes in, dressed as he was in Act 1. He closes the door behind him. Neither man looks at him. The second man. "I knew that Andy Constantino would never come up with those 5/8 rods. So he said he would. So I said, drop dead." "Well, who's right now? You tell me." Turns to Joe. "What do you want, Mr. Joe?" "I'm waiting for Frank Doherty." The second man. "What do you want to see him about?" Joe. "I have a personal matter I want to see him about." The second man. "You can't wait in here. Wait outside." The first man, looking out the little window. "Here comes Frank." The second man. "Oh, he's going to blow the roof off of those rods, boy. I told him yesterday they ain't going to be here," and he said. The door opens and a tall, angular Irishman of about 50 comes in. "Listen, Frank, the rods didn't come in yet. I got a whole crew outside waiting to get started. You told me yesterday, get them ready for the morning." Doherty. "Where's Andy?" The second man. "I don't know. He ain't here yet either." Doherty to the first man. "Get Andy on the phone for me." To Joe. "Hello, Manx. What do you want?" "What do you want?" Joe. "I'd like to have a couple of minutes alone with you." Doherty. "I ain't got time now, Manx." Joe looks at Doherty, then at the scowling faces of the other two men. Joe. "I need $4,000, Doherty. I got a very interesting proposition." Doherty. "What is it?" Joe. I can get a hold of a piece of land." Doherty. "What land?" Joe. 15 acres out in the Williston area." Doherty. "Not interested." The first man on phone. "Is Andy Constantino there?" "Well, where is he?" "Get a hold of him. Tell him Frank Doherty wants to talk to him right away." To Doherty as he hangs up. "He ain't there, Frank." The second man. "He's probably out trying to round up some rods now." Joe. "Doherty, I know it's marshland, but if you think in terms of 1,000 houses." Doherty. "That land won't hold houses. Louis Miles was around here yesterday trying to sell me that piece of land. I'll tell you what I told Louis. I tried to build in Williston 5 years ago. I was knee-deep in water. I don't want no part of it. I'm not interested." He crosses to the door. "Are we going to have to pay those men of yours while we're waiting for those rods?" The second man. "Yeah." Doherty. "Call the union. Manx, that land won't hold any kind of foundation. I told Louis Miles to try and sell it to the city. They're looking for some land to put up a community playground." The second man on phone. "Is Herbie Swanson there?" Doherty wants him. Doherty. That land might hold some tennis courts. That's about all it's good for. Joe. I think you're making a mistake, Doherty. Doherty. It won't be the first time. Takes the phone from the second man. Have you got them yet? Into the receiver. Hello? Hello, this is Frank Doherty. Who am I talking to? The camera moves on to Joe Manx. His face shows a mixture of envy for the activity going on around him and embarrassment at his futility in front of the other men. Over him comes Doherty's voice. Doherty. Listen, Herbie, I got a crew of lathers here, but I can't use them for at least a couple of hours. Do I have to pay them? Oh, come on, Herbie, for Pete's sake. I can't afford to throw $700 down the sewer. I'm doing this job close to the skin as it is. Joe turns and starts out of the shack. Well, maybe you can help me out this way. You know where I can get a hold of 1,400 rods right away? I already tried Constantino. He was supposed to have them here this morning. Joe exits, closing the door behind him. Dissolve to the restaurant of Act 1, Scene 1. Actually, we fade in on a short, stout little man of about 50 named Sam Harvard. He is hunched over his coffee, which he sips slowly and methodically in between small pieces of Danish pastry. Once he looks quickly across the table to Joe and then back to the pastry in his hand, he chews. Harvard, without looking up. Joe, why do you always hit me for these interesting propositions of yours? Why don't you hit someone else for a change? Joe. I came to you, Sam, because Harvard. You came to me 4 or 5 years ago with some lunatic proposition about going into the trucking line. And I gave you $2,000 then, which I knew was money out the window when I gave it to you. And wasn't there something once about a tool and die plant you wanted to invest in? Another of your interesting propositions that cost me $1,000, I think? Joe, why don't you hit somebody else for a change? Joe. Sam, I'm going to tell you the truth. I went to Doherty. I went to Irving Stone. I went to J.C. Shermer Incorporated. They're getting old. They only want surefire propositions. Office buildings, government jobs. I didn't want to come to you, Sam. I'm very conscious of the money that I owe you. Harvard. Don't be so conscious. You don't have to pay me. I don't need the money, but Joe, don't ask me for another $4,000 for such a lunatic proposition as this 1,000 ranch houses in Williston. Joe, I just want to remind you I built houses before. I'm not a baby in the... Go walk in the Chestnut Street area. Before I poured a footing there, the whole area was snakes and frogs. The grass was so high you could get lost. Harvard breaks off another piece of Danish, looks up from under his heavy brows. Harvard. Joe, the answer is no. He sips his coffee and chews slowly and methodically. We fade out. Dissolve to a clock sitting on the buffet chest in the Manx's dining alcove. A telephone is ringing. The wife comes out of the kitchen to answer it. She wears what might be her best dress, but her sleeves are rolled up. The wife. Hello? Hello, Joe, how are you? Where have you been all day? Plenty of things have been happening here. You missed all the fun. The groom's father called up about 4:30 and invited us over to their house this afternoon. Yeah, we just came back about 10 minutes ago. Quite a pair of in-laws we've inherited. The father is all right, but the mother is a real cold potato. The daughter enters the room. The wife interrupts her phone conversation to speak to the daughter. Marilyn, do me a favor. I started some water boiling for the vegetables. Put some salt in it. Then take the chicken out of the refrigerator. The daughter nods and passes on into the kitchen. Well, Joe, when are you coming home? Why not? Don't talk so fast. I can't understand you. Joe, did something happen today to upset you? You sound very depressed. Are you depressed? How do you feel, Joe? You don't sound good to me. Maybe you better give up the card game tonight and come on home and get some rest. All right, don't get angry. All right, Joe, give me a call when you get to Harry Gerber's. Goodbye, Joe. Hangs up, she turns from the phone, frowning. The daughter comes out of the kitchen and sets a bowl of salad on the table. He's not coming home for dinner, so let's just have the chicken from yesterday and the vegetables. Is that all right with you? The daughter, that's fine with me. The daughter goes back into the kitchen. The wife, still frowning, goes to the buffet table chest, opens a drawer, and extracts some silverware. She starts setting two places, but her thoughts are elsewhere. She sits, brows knit in thought. The daughter comes back from the kitchen with a cold roast chicken, two large plates, and some paper napkins, sets up places for her mother and herself. The wife. I'm worried about him. I'm worried about him because he's beginning to talk like a fool. 4 or 5 years ago, you listened to his big propositions and you say, well, maybe some of his old friends will help him out. But now it seems to me he's beginning to sound like a comic character. What do you think, Marilyn? The daughter. Oh, he'll be all right, Ma. The wife. Do you think so? I don't think so. I think something terrible is going to happen to him. He doesn't talk like a completely sensible person anymore. I look at him sometimes. It seems to me he's in another world dreaming. The daughter sits across from her mother, studies the dish before her. The daughter. He was a big shot once. He had a taste of what it was like. It's hard for a man of his age to adjust to new situations. The wife. It's not a new situation. It's 15 years old. He's got to understand that it's not important to be the governor's best friend. He was like that as long as I've known him, even as a boy. He was always the big spender. Before we were married, he used to take me to the Hippodrome in New York City. At that time, the Hippodrome was the big date of all dates. They used to have big spectacles there, like circuses. It used to cost $1. In those days, $1 was $1. He used to take me every week. I never knew where he got the money. He never had a job in his life. He was always in this business or that business. He was always what we used to call a sport. He was the first one in our whole crowd to have a car. I'll never forget. He came driving down the street, wobbling from one sidewalk to the other. He was a kind and generous man, your father. He had an open hand to everybody. You were too young then. You don't remember. The parties we used to give when we lived in the big house on Rogers Boulevard every Sunday. I tell you, that house used to be filled till 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. Well, we don't give big parties anymore. He'll have to change. Eat some cold chicken. The daughter. He's not going to change, Ma. Not at his age. The wife. He's got to go out and earn a living, Marilyn. The daughter. Ma, why talk foolish? He isn't going to go out and get a job. In the first place, where is he going to go get a job? Who's going to give it to him? The wife. Harry Gerber offered him a job. The daughter, surprised. Oh yeah? When was this? The wife. A couple of weeks ago. It's a small job, a building inspector. It would be fine for us. He don't want to take it. The daughter. Ma, don't push him. It isn't in him. He likes big things. It would kill him to be a little man. I know that you're probably nagging him to take this job. You're thinking what a burden you and Pop are on me, especially now that I'm getting married. Believe me, I don't resent it. The wife. Marilyn, you're not going to support Joe and me anymore. The daughter. Ma, I talked this all out with George long ago. I'm going to take a couple of thousand out of Aunt Eva's money and we're going to put it down on a little house somewheres. Probably out in Kingston. And you and Pop are going to live with us. George says it's perfectly okay with him. The wife. You're 26 years old. It's time to have babies. The daughter. Sure, it's time to have babies. When a baby comes, we'll worry about it. Listen, Ma, you don't think George and I haven't discussed this 1,000 times between us? But life doesn't dovetail so nicely. Don't worry about us. We'll have plenty of babies. The doorbell rings. How much do you want to bet that's George? She plucks a piece of chicken loose, rises, and goes to the door, munching away. The wife suddenly starts from her seat. The wife. Oh, for heaven's sakes, I forgot the vegetables. The water's probably all boiled out already. She hurries into the kitchen. The daughter opens the door of the apartment. It is indeed George standing there. The daughter. I knew it was you. George. I haven't seen you in an hour. I missed you. Well, what are you going to do? The daughter. Come on in. You want some cold chicken? George comes in. The daughter closes the door behind him. George. To tell you the truth, I figured we might go to a restaurant tonight, have a celebration. Because you know what? The daughter. What? George. My mother likes your mother. The daughter. Hallelujah. Come on in. Sit down for a minute. She leads him back to the dining table where they take seats. The daughter calls to her mother in the kitchen. The daughter. It's him again, Ma. George calling. Hello, Mrs. Meggs. The wife off in the kitchen. Hello, George. Give him some chicken, Marilyn. The daughter calling to the wife. We're going to go out and eat, Ma, if you'll excuse us. The wife in kitchen. Sure. Go ahead. She appears in the kitchen doorway holding a saucepan. I burned the vegetables anyway. Go on out. Have a good time. Disappears back into the kitchen. The daughter and George sit for a minute. The daughter. My father was offered a job. George looks up vaguely. George. Yeah? The daughter. Yeah. It would be nice, eh? George. Sure. Is he going to take it? The daughter thinks a while, then shakes her head. The daughter. I don't think so, George. But it would be nice. I could even quit my job after a year. George smiles. Yeah. Well, what do you say? You want to go? The daughter. Is this dress okay? George. Sure. They both stand. The daughter moves slowly to George, and for a moment they stand, hazily warm and comfortable in their communication. She looks softly at him. The daughter. But it would be so nice. George smiles at her. George. Sure. The daughter turns her head to call goodbye to her mother, is shocked to see her standing in the kitchen doorway holding the saucepan, watching them with troubled eyes. The daughter. Goodbye, Ma. The wife. Goodbye, Marilyn. Goodbye, George. Have a nice time. George. Goodbye, Mrs. Meggs. The young couple move into the foyer, open the door, and pass out into the outside hallway, closing the door after them. The wife stands unmoving, watching them, even for a long moment after the door has closed behind them. Then she moves slowly to the telephone table, sets the saucepan down, dials a number, and waits expressionlessly for an answer. The wife. Harry? Is this Harry Gerber? Harry, this is Doris Meggs. Listen, did I take you away from your dinner? Harry, I'll tell you why I called. Joe says he's coming over to your house for cards tonight. Yeah, well, I'm a little worried about him, Harry. He called up from downtown. He sounded very depressed. Harry, make him take the job. I know, Harry, but please make him take the job. Dissolved to Joe Meggs leaning forward over a table, reaching for some cards in front of another player. The camera dollies back to show the pinochle game taking place in Harry Gerber's living room. 4 men sit around the table. On Joe's right sits the complainer, and directly across from the table, The table from Joe sits the well-dressed man, so named for reasons that will soon be obvious. On Joe's left sits Harry Gerber, a heavy-set, sympathetic man of 50. The living room is comfortably furnished, in particular an easy chair. Joe has apparently just won the last hand and is to deal the next. The complainer, leaning across to Gerber. Why did you play the king? You knew he was sitting there with a singleton ace. If you led the ace, I would have put the king on. The well-dressed man. All right. How much did this hand cost me? Gerber. $50. Gerber and the well-dressed man send $50 to Joe's little pile of money. Joe is rifling the cards. The complainer is still complaining to Gerber. The complainer. If you run the government, Harry, like you play pinochle, no wonder we're in the condition we're in. To Joe. How much do I owe you, Joe? Joe. $50. The complainer, pushing 2 quarters over to Joe. I haven't won a hand all night, you know that? I get nothing but 9s and jacks. The well-dressed man. So, I was telling you, Harry, I went into the store and I told the salesman, look, money is no object. I want a suit that will hold its shape in hot weather. So he takes out this bolt of cloth. The camera moves in on Joe as he rifles with the cards. His eyes are down. He is obviously thinking of other things than the card game. Over close-up, we hear the others' voices. The complainer. Right now, all I want out of life is to see one flush, preferably in spades. The well-dressed man. Harry, feel this cloth, will you? Have you any idea how much this suit cost me? $189. Joe begins to deal out the cards 3 at a time first round, then 4 at a time until the deck runs out. The complainer. Joe, are we or are we not old friends? Joe. Sure. The complainer. Then deal me a decent hand, will ya? The well-dressed man. Joe, take a guess. How much do you think I paid for this suit? $189. It's a special cloth imported from Egypt. They wear this kind of material in the desert. The complainer, picking up his cards as they come in. Joe, what are you doing me here? What are you trying to do, bankrupt me? The well-dressed man. This material is as light as paper, but it wears like iron. The complainer, leaning over and showing his cards to Joe, who, as dealer, does not play in the hand. Look what you gave me, will ya? Do you see 50 points meld in this whole hand? To the others. All right. Who bids? The well-dressed man. So, Joe, let me tell you about this suit. The complainer. Harry, what do you say? Gerber. 300. The well-dressed man. So, Joe, this suit, rain or shine, it hold its crease. It doesn't wrinkle. I could jump in the river and swim in it. It won't wrinkle. The only trouble is it makes me sweat so much. I'll be honest with you, I don't know how they manage in Egypt with it. The complainer. Hey, Lewison, what do you say? The well-dressed man. What? The complainer. Pick up your cards, will you? Gerber says 300. It's up to you. The well-dressed man, painfully picking up one card at a time. I was telling Joe about the suit. The complainer. Lewison, do me a favor. The next time you come in for a pinochle game, come naked, will ya? The well-dressed man, screwing up his face as he examines each card and puts it into place in his hand. Let's see, what have I got here? Silence descends over the card players as they wait for the well-dressed man to figure out his hand. In the silence, Joe leans forward, folds his hands on the table before him, and speaks quietly. Joe. Listen, I need $4,000. Can you give it to me, you fellows? The complainer, turning to him. What? Joe, to the complainer. What do you say, Davis? We've been playing pinochle together 20 years almost. Will you lend me $4,000? The complainer, a little nervously. Lend it? Another couple of hands, you'll win it from me. The well-dressed man, laying his cards down and turning to Joe. What do you need the money for, Joe? Are you in trouble? Joe, I need it for a business proposition. I want to buy a piece of land. The well-dressed man picking up his cards again. Oh, land. Land I don't know anything about. If you were in some kind of trouble, if you needed an operation, or if you wanted to pay off a mortgage, something like that, I might be able to dig up a couple of thousand for you. But land, I'm not interested in. Studies his cards. Let's see. What's the bid to me? The complainer with nervous embarrassment. Come on, let's play cards. Gerber said 300. What do you say, Lewison? The well-dressed man. 300 is good with me. The complainer. It's good with me, too. You want it, Harry, or not? Gerber is regarding Joe Mengs with concern. Gerber. Joe, what is this proposition you want the 4,000 for? Joe, in a sudden burst of irascibility, slams the table with his hand. Joe, almost snarling. Come on, Harry, let's play cards. It's 300 up to you. Do you want it or not? Gerber, without even looking at his hand. I don't want it. Joe. All right, throw in the hand. Here, deal. He pushes the discards as they are thrown down toward Gerber. Look, are we going to play cards or are we going to talk? If we're going to play, let's play. If we're going to talk, let's talk. He suddenly stands, growing more frenzied. My good friends, 4 lousy $1,000. You can't lend me 4 lousy $1,000. What am I? Some kind of a bum or something? I built plenty of houses in my time. Good double brick homes. 3 coats of plaster. He seizes the few bills and silver in front of him and scatters the money on the table. Here, a couple of more bucks for you. He turns and walks out. Gerber rises quickly from his seat. Gerber, calling. Joe! He moves quickly after his friend. Slow dissolve to Joe Mengs, sitting in the easy chair in Gerber's living room. Some time has passed, about an hour. The overhead lights of the previous scene have been turned off, and now the only illumination comes from the standing lamp behind the easy chair. There is enough light to see, however, as we pull back, that the cards still lie scattered on the table, except for a few that Harry Gerber is shuffling and reshuffling as he sits at the table. There is a cup of coffee in front of Harry Gerber, and Joe is holding his cup, sipping occasionally. He appears to have calmed down a great deal, even to the point of depression. Joe. I want them all, Harry. I went to them all, Harry. I went to Doherty, to Shermer. I went to Sam Harvard, Marty Kingsley, Irving Stone. Some of these men used to mix cement for me. I couldn't raise $4,000. I couldn't raise $4,000. Doherty brushed me off him like I was mud on his pants. I tell you, Harry, if somebody told me yesterday that Joe Mengs couldn't raise $4,000, I would have laughed in his face. What does it mean? Will you tell me? What does it mean? Gerber. Joe. Tell me the truth, Harry. Do they laugh at me when I'm not around? Gerber. All right. I'll tell you the truth. You haven't got a name in this trade anymore, Joe, and you're kidding yourself if you think you have. You can go on like this for the rest of your life, or you can act like a mensch and face a couple of facts. I got a job for you. Come and take it. It's the best job I can get for you. I tried to get you a desk job where you could feel like an executive, but the flat truth is they wouldn't have you. I'm leveling with you, Joe. Take it or leave it. It's $3,600 a year. It'll pay your rent, and it'll give you a little self-respect. Turns his attention back to the few cards he is shuffling. Joe, I'm your friend. Anytime you need me, you know you can come to me. If I had $4,000, I'd give it to you, but I want you to know I'd give it to you out of charity, and I'd never expect to see it again. Joe studying his coffee. Well, that's straight talk. I respect you for it, but I don't want your job. He sets the coffee down on an end table. Gerber. What is it? A question of pride? Are you ashamed to work for me? Joe stands. Harry, I've been bankrupt for 15 years. When you're a bankrupt, as long as I am, $3,600 a year ain't gonna turn the trick. It isn't gonna make up for all the failures. Gerber. What failures? Joe. You talk about facing facts? All right, let's face some facts. I failed as a man. I failed as a father. What did I ever give those two women? What did I ever give them? My wife wears the same cloth coat for 4 years. Do you know that? Gerber. You haven't failed anybody, Joe. Joe. From the age of 10, I never bought my daughter even a birthday present. She's getting married Friday. What will my wedding gift be? A house for the newlyweds? A $10,000 bond? Do you know how it haunts me that I can't buy that girl something? What contempt she must have for me? Gerber. Joe, you're talking like a fool. You're a wonderful father. Your girl is crazy about you. Stop torturing yourself. Joe. Look, Harry, don't worry about me. I'm having a little rough time right now, but I'll come out of it. I'm 52 years old. Maybe I can't run around the block anymore, but I'm still operating where it counts. Gerber. Joe, sit down a minute. Joe. Apparently nobody has any faith in me, not even my best friend. Well, Harry, I'll dig up $4,000 somewheres one way or another, and I'll buy 15 lousy acres of swamp. His voice is beginning to rise. And I'll show you what Joe Manx can do with it. I'll put the Empire State Building on that swamp. I'm a man of respect. Bricklayers like Frank Doherty will come on their knees to kiss my hand. He suddenly smiles, but there is something almost wild about him. And Harry, when I die, I'll leave $3,600 a year for you in my will. He nods his head once or twice, then turns and stumps out of the room. Fade out. Act 3. Fade in. The bedroom of Joe and Doris Manx later that night. The room is dark. We fade in on the wife lying on her back on her bed asleep. Suddenly her eyes open. Then her head slowly turns in the direction of her husband's bed. The camera slowly pans over to Joe's bed. It is empty. The blankets have been pushed aside and the sheets are mussed, indicating that Joe has recently been sleeping there. The wife slowly sits up in bed, tense and apprehensive, but outwardly aimless. She moves quickly around the beds to the door of the bedroom, opens it, passes into the dark hallway. She goes through the kitchen, opens that door, and steps into the main living room. Joe Manx is seated in his large master chair, his arms resting regally on the armrests. He wears his trousers and bedroom slippers, but he has no shirt on. His hair is uncombed, and there is a distraught quality about him. The wife. What's the matter, Joe? You can't sleep? Joe regards his wife with wide eyes. Joe. Doris, I'll tell you what I've been thinking. I think I'm going to go away for a couple of days. I just called the station. I can get a train to St. Louis at 4:49 a.m., then I catch a flyer for Las Vegas. Stands, begins to pace around, hands behind his back. The convention last year in Atlantic City. A feller there from Las Vegas, he told me Las Vegas is just booming. He says houses are springing up overnight. A city jumping up out of the desert, like Florida in the 1920s. Well, I think I'll take a look at this Las Vegas. Listen, a clever man can make himself a bundle. He's patting his pants pockets for cigarettes now. Then, too, I might have a look in California, see what the situation on the coast is. Listen, I've heard wonderful things about the coast. Los Angeles, San Diego. I've got some friends in San Diego. They told me, Manx, anytime you feel like switching your area of activity, there's plenty of room for you here. The wife. Joe, come to bed. Joe comes to the table, leans intently across to his wife. Joe. Lady, I have a feeling Las Vegas is going to turn the trick. I was lying in bed thinking, and then suddenly, like the burning bush, it came to me. It was like somebody spoke the thought aloud. Go to Las Vegas. What am I pushing pennies in Toledo? Well, let's pick up a couple of things for me and a toothbrush. He starts briskly past his wife for the kitchen door, but his wife puts out a gentle hand on his forearm. The wife. Joe. Her touch seems to crumble him. He turns to her suddenly gaunt and broken. Joe, crying out in sheer anguish, Doris, I gotta get out of this town. The wife. I know, Joe. I know. Joe, they're squeezing me here, you understand? They're squeezing me. The wife. I understand, Joe. Joe, look at me, for heaven's sakes. They're all making a living but me. What's the matter with me? The wife. There's nothing the matter with you, Joe. He crosses the sofa, sits, slack and empty. Joe. I would just like to close my eyes and wake up with another name, because I'm sick in my heart of being Joe Manx. The wife. Joe, we don't want $1 million from you. We love you, Joe. We love you if you build houses or if you don't build houses. We just want to have you around the house. We like to eat dinner with you. We like to see your face. Joe rises heavily from his seat and moves a few paces away. As he moves from the wife, he lets his hand rest lightly against her face in mute appreciation of her sympathy. The wife sits there deeply wary herself. Joe, muttering, I don't know. Maybe there's something in this Las Vegas. The wife, more sharply than she intended. There's nothing in Las Vegas, Joe. She sits trying to hold the edge of impatience inside her, fishing desperately in her mind for something to say to her husband. Joe, I'm tired myself. I'd like to have a little peace. I'd like to know we live in a certain place and that a certain amount of money is coming in every week, so at least we know where we stand. I don't want a lot of money. I just don't want to have to carry a sick feeling in my stomach all the time that you're going to come home depressed and miserable. I don't want to listen to you turning around in bed all night long. I want to be able to go to sleep peacefully, knowing that you're also having a good night's sleep. I don't have much strength left, Joe. This kind of living is eating us up. Deeply exhausted, she rests her face in the palm of one hand. Joe stands silently. She has reached home with him. Finally, he comes to her and gently takes her arm. Joe. It's all right, Doris. It's all right. Go to sleep. The wife, still hiding her face in her hand. You owe this to me, Joe. Joe helps her from the chair. Go to sleep. I want to do a little thinking. The wife. Joe, if I said anything that hurt you, it's because I'm all knocked out. Joe, helping her to the door. You didn't hurt me. The wife. Let's go to bed. We'll get some sleep. Joe. Go to sleep, Doris. You're all knocked out. I'm going to work out something, don't worry. They stand now on the kitchen threshold, looking wearily at each other. I don't deserve you, Doris. The wife. Come to bed, Joe. Joe. In a couple of minutes. The wife turns and shuffles out of view. Joe watches her disappearing form for a few moments. And he turns and begins again the slow, measured pacing up and down the dining room. We stay with him for 4 or 5 lengths of the room. Fade out slowly. Dissolve to close-up of daughter's face. She is sleeping. We are in her bedroom, which is just off the living room. It is dark. The daughter turns in her bed and then reverts back to her original position. Then, somehow aware that she is being looked at, she opens her eyes and awakens. She looks up. Joe is standing beside her bed and looking down at her. She is up on her elbow immediately. The daughter. Is something wrong, Pa? Joe, in a low voice. I wonder if I could talk to you for a minute, Marilyn. The daughter. Sure. Joe. Listen, Marilyn, I'm going to ask a terrific favor of you. The daughter. Sure, Pa. Joe. First, let me finish. I need your $5,000. I want to buy Louis Miles's land. It's the only piece of land I can get my hands on, do you understand? It's a piece of swamp. It's marsh, but it's the best I can get. I have to have land before I can manipulate. I know what it means to you, Marilyn, the $5,000, but I know you need it for your marriage, but you have to have faith in me. I'll give it back to you 1,000 times over. Marilyn, I wouldn't ask you this, but I need it. The daughter. Sure, Pa. I'll make you out a check now. You can cash it in the morning. She starts to sit up. Joe stares at her, unbelieving. Then the accumulated tension breaks within him, and he begins to sob. He turns away from his daughter in shame and goes out into the living room, hiding his eyes in his hands. The sobs coming in hoarse, half-caught gasps. He walks aimlessly around the living room, hiding his eyes, crying uncontrollably. His daughter appears in the doorway of a room, watching him anxiously. The daughter. Pa. He turns to her, still hiding his eyes. Joe. Brokenly. What did I ever give you? He sinks down onto a chair, cupping his face in both hands now. The daughter moves slowly to him. The daughter. Pa, look at me. Am I an unhappy girl? I'm happy. I love George. I love you. I love Mama. I got a responsible job. The boss is satisfied with me. That's what you gave me. I'll make you out a check. Joe has to shake his head a few times before he can answer. Joe. I don't want it. He rises weakly and starts for the kitchen door. The daughter. Pa. Joe. Go to sleep. Go to sleep. He goes into the kitchen, across it and down the foyer to the door of his bedroom, opens it and goes in. His wife is lying on her bed and turns to watch his entrance. He doesn't look at her. He goes to his bed, sits down. He is over his tears now and is just breathing heavily. Joe, mumbling. All right. I'll take the job with Harry Gerber. The wife. I didn't hear you, Joe. Joe, louder. I said I'll take the job with Harry Gerber. At least they'll have one honest building inspector. He lies back on the bed now, looking up at the ceiling. This was a crazy day. A crazy day. His eyes close and he dozes off. Fade out. The end. The Big Deal Television Craft. The Big Deal turned out an effective piece of television, but it is more suited to the stage. Actually, it would not have made as good a stage play as it did a television drama. But even so, its sheer weight and power are too much to be handled to television's fullest advantage. The Big Deal did not exploit the particular techniques of television. Of course, the mobility of the television camera, rudimentary as it is, allowed me to move this weighty chunk of theater along at a much faster clip than it would have come out on the stage. I was not confined to a one-scene set, nor did I have to write unnecessary lines of dialogue to justify characters being on that set when they would not naturally be there. I was able to concentrate the action of my story on the people directly involved. I was even able to catch more literal reality than I could have caught in a stage play. Nevertheless, The Big Deal is still too theatrical for my money. The main character is more obsessed than he is real, and the dialogue still falls far too frequently into the stagey, pungent language that people in real life do not use. Where The Big Deal went astray was in its basic approach. It is too obvious a drama for television. The story is too powerful. Obviousness is, unfortunately, one of the properties of the stage play. The stage play is directed to a large group of people, many of whom must be shouted so that the words can be heard. On the stage, the writer does not capture the relationships between his characters, rather he projects them. We have caught Joe Manx, his wife, and his daughter on an exceptional day in their lives. A day dominated by a desperate pursuit of $4,000, culminating in the highest peak of crisis in Joe Manx's life. In terms of craft, this means that every scene, almost every line, is dominated by the heightened urgency of the story. It is my tentative belief that television does not do its best with dramas centered around a peak of tremendous crisis. Television is better suited to everyday crises through which the same depth of insight can be achieved, but without the excessive theatricality. I do not want to get into what makes for good television material and what doesn't. This is something I would prefer to discuss using Marty and the Mother. Nor do I want to get into any comparisons between the hour television drama and the stage play or the movie. There is indeed a current tendency among the academicians of the theater to compare the three mediums. Sorry about that. I have heard the television drama described, by myself as well as others, as an extended one-act play, or a small play, or a three-quarter movie. At this moment, I believe the hour drama is none of these at all. Television writing is a form of drama peculiar to itself, more peculiar than any of us now writing for the medium really know. There is a special technique to writing television, a special craft, and its uniqueness is best shown by the dismal failure of successful Broadway playwrights and scenario writers to merely transfer to television. The technique of a new writing form is not something that springs full-blown from anyone's head. The television writer has had to adjust laboriously to the distinct limitations of the medium, and it is within these adjustments that a new style and a particular sort of material is prescribed. Television has endless limitations that force upon the writer a distinct approach to his work. In television, for example, you cannot handle comfortably more than 4 people on the screen at the same time. This means you cannot write mob scenes or capture expansive crowd moods like the nervous freneticism of a packed New Year's Eve party. If you have a story about a lynching or a political convention, forget it. The efforts of enterprising directors to capture the effect of 5,000 people by using 10 actors are pathetic. They are pathetic, for that matter, on the stage too. But on the stage there is a convention of impressionism. The audience will accept 10 people standing as a crowd to indicate a much larger group. The audience will not accept this on a television unless you are doing a highly impressionistic or expressionistic drama. For that matter, impressionistic and lyrical dramas suffer a bad fate on television. The use of blank sets with no scenery had a moment of novelty, but has faded out. Television has a camera, and the audience expects the camera to show it something real. It costs about $500 to raise one camera to any appreciable height off the studio floor, which makes any real use of high-angle photography impractical. Besides, most studios in New York have relatively low ceilings. The major networks are now building large, high-ceilinged studios in Hollywood, but it is doubtful whether any of the hour drama programs will switch to Hollywood for a long time. The best actors, writers, and directors are in New York, and the only definite advantage Hollywood has is the steady sunshine required for any planned photography. The hour drama cannot be done well on film, at least not under present budget conditions. It takes at least 3 weeks to shoot a good hour feature film, and this is much too expensive. Film is fine for half-hour situation shows in which the lighting and the sets are ready and standing week in and week out. In shooting a different hour drama every week, you will have to reset all your lighting for each scene. And the fastest directors consider themselves lucky if they can get from 5 to 10 pages of script shot in a day. Besides, the live show has a sense of continuity to it, which helps the actor give an honest performance. In shooting a show on film, you shoot all the scenes that take place in one set at the same time, whether or not there is any continuity to them at all. The actor and the director work in bits and pieces, and the actor has little idea of how he felt the scene before or how he will the scene after. Certainly, the present crop of live-hour shows are far superior to filmed dramas. Until the economics of television unwind themselves, permitting the bold expenditure required by a decent film, the live show will always be superior and the exodus to Hollywood will be delayed. So, you might as well resign yourself to the confinement of the X-radio studios now being used for television purposes. Needless to say, you are limited in the number of your sets because the scene designer can fit just so many into the space he is allowed. You can probably get away with 4 fairly detailed sets and 1 or 2 insert sets. Insert sets are really nothing more than a few pieces of furniture with a blank flat behind them. For example, the hero leaves his house and goes to his office. His office, for all practical purposes, will consist of a desk with papers on it and a chair. The scene will be shot tight, hoping the audience will assume what the rest of the room looks like. If you write windows and glass doors into your scripts, you will be disturbed on blocking out day to find out that there are no windows and the door is a wooden one. The reason for that is simple. If you have a window, you must be able to look out of it. This necessitates the construction of another set to represent the view. If windows are vital to your script, be careful not to have too many other sets so that there will be space for a flat representing the view. Don't bother writing fires or floods because the fire department and the Department of Buildings won't allow you. You will get some wisps of smoke and a small puddle of water. Avoid exteriors unless they are the main set of your script. Jungles come out on the screen like just so many potted plants, and a street scene is nakedly made of paper mache and plywood. The mobility of television, television, while better than the stage, is still primitive. The actors have literally to run from one set to another to get into the next scene. This means you have to contrive endings to your scenes which allow for the actor to get about. Obviously, the actor cannot make any extensive costume or makeup changes while he races from one end of the studio to the other. You cannot cut in television as you can in the movies. In the movies, a scene is shot from 4 or 5 different angles, and the editor cuts back and forth from each take as he sees fit. In television, you cut from one camera to another rather than by a splicing machine. Sharp cuts, as for example if you cut from one person to another during a telephone conversation, overlap and are usually embarrassing, as happened to me in Holiday Song. It is possible to make a sharp cut in television, but it requires the closest collaboration between the director, the head cameraman, the two cameramen on the floor manager, and the actors. Cuts should be reserved for vital dramatic movements and not for general pace. It is much wiser to dissolve from one scene to another. And if you have a telephone call in your script, it is better to split it in half rather than cut on each spoken line. This makes for a slower pace, but for a cleaner production. The basic limitation in television is time. The hour drama is 53 minutes long. You can tell just so much in 53 minutes. A stage play, for purposes of comparison, plays about an hour and 20 minutes, and a movie about an hour and a half. Transferred into terms of craft, this means you need only one subplot, never more than two. Television cannot take a thick, fully woven fabric of drama. It can only handle simple lines of movement and consequently smaller moments of crisis. The last act of The Big Deal shows a man closing in to the verge of a breakdown. Can you imagine the scene on a stage? It is a big scene. It should be played fully with wideness and height. David Apatow gave a brilliant performance as the father, but in this scene he was physically restricted to rising and sitting and to occasional steps here and there. It is difficult to play a man fairly bursting from within himself with such physical restrictions. The crisis of The Big Deal was too big to be handled properly on television. The relationships between Joe Manx and his wife and his daughter needed to be seen more if the positive resolution of the play was to make honest sense. The point of the play was that this man had given the true values of life to his family: warmth, love, respect, dignity, which was a far more successful achievement than material wealth. I didn't have the time to show how he had given all these qualities. I had to be satisfied with some speeches in the third act to establish this, and only an indication here and there in the first two acts. We know almost nothing about his wife or what she got from her marriage. Where did the daughter learn the open generosity she evidences in the third act when she offers all her money without a second thought? Thanks to a careful portrayal of the part by Anne Jackson, we were able to see some of the love she held for her, but it was not adequately written into the script. These are major flaws in the script, not just academic comments. And they are flaws not through any malfeasance of duty on my part, but because there just wasn't enough time in 53 minutes to build all the information required. The big dramatic story is not for television. There is much too much substance that goes into such a moment. Craft-wise, The Big Deal would have been better as a stage play. Nor is the multiple story proper for television. The multiple story is the kind of thing only the movies can do well. This is the kind of script in which a number of independent stories wind around one focal incident. The Bachelor Party is a good example of this. Accurately written, The Bachelor Party should have told the individual stories of 5 men who go on a night about town, each of whom resolves something in his own life as a result of the party. This does not violate the basic rule which states that a script can be about only one leading character and that all other characters are used as they facilitate the main story. The leading character would still be Charlie, and the other 4 stories, independent as they would be, would still exist only as they shaped the main line. However, in the multiple story, you build the body of your script by cutting from one story to the other as the basic line accumulates to its high point. This means there are no such things as first and second act curtains. One story or another is always moving along. In television, you have to have first and second act curtains for the reason that the commercials have to be introduced. The very presence of commercials indicates the broadcast and most all-inclusive limitation of television technique. Television is essentially an advertising and not an entertainment medium. The advertising agencies are interested only in selling their clients' products, and they do not want dramas that will disturb potential customers. This limits the choice of material markedly. You cannot write about adultery, abortion, the social values of our times, or almost anything that relates to adult reality. Compounding this fearful restriction is the ever-prevalent illusion that the audience only wants to see light drama, gay comedies about beautiful young people in love. If the girl and boy do not get married in the end, the script is referred to as downbeat. Downbeat type drama is almost as taboo as politically controversial stories. These are the limitations that the first television writers were faced with. They can hardly be blamed for the incredible trash they wrote. The limitations are still with us, and much of the trash is. But in the desperate search to adjust, new areas of writing are being opened up, areas that are peculiar to their limitations. Television drama cannot expand in breadth, so it must expand in depth. In the last year or so, television writers have learned that they can write intimate dramas. Intimate, meaning minutely detailed studies of small moments of life. Marty is a good example of this stage of progress. Now, the word for television drama is depth, the digging under the surface of life for the more profound truths of human relationships. This is an area that no other dramatic medium has handled or can adequately handle. It is an area that sooner or later will run head-on into the taboos, not only of television, but of our entire way of life. Yet I cannot help but feel that this is where drama is going. These are strange and fretful times, and the huge inevitable currents of history are too broad now to provide individual people with any meaning to their lives. People are beginning to turn into themselves, looking for personal happiness. The offices of psychoanalysts are flooded with disturbed human beings. The psychiatric clinics of hospitals are too terribly understaffed to handle the demands of the public. Hardly a newspaper, at least in New York, does not carry a syndicated psychiatrist or similar columnist. The jargon of introspection has become everyday conversation. Our national bestsellers are non-fiction books dealing with ways of achieving personal adjustments to life. The theater and all its sister mediums can only be a reflection of their times, and the drama of introspection is the drama that the people want to see. It may seem foolish to say, but television, the scorned stepchild of drama, may well be the basic theater of our century.